Hi, I'm Tim Stevens, and today I'm here with Ron Vogel, who happens to be a World War II veteran. Ron, thank you for taking some time out of your day to share some of your stories and experiences with me.
Thank you.
I think it's increasingly important that we do document stories such as World War II veterans because we don't have these opportunities forever. And again, I appreciate you taking your time to share stories with me. If you don't mind, I'd like to start out with just some questions just to get to know who Ron Vogel is.
Yeah.
First of all, where did you grow up?
I grew up in California, in the southern part of California. I would say most of my years, my early years, I was probably 18 to 30 miles from LA City Hall. And I went, my first 2 years of high school I spent in Monrovia, Arcadia. And my last 2 years I spent at a military academy.
I know from talking with you before that you lived with your mother.
And she was a very big influence on my life, of course.
You didn't have any family necessarily that you know of that was in the Navy or the Marines or the Army?
There was no reason for me to join because of past relatives. Although the only thing I can think of, you mentioned that, I had an uncle from Brookings, South Dakota that was in the Army, and he was in Italy. And then I had another uncle that was in the Army, and he was too old, and they discharged him, and he was a cook, and he was too old to be, so he got discharged.
Oh, okay. So May 24th, was it 1944?
May 24, 1944, yes.
You turned 18, and at that time, World War II had already been going on for 2 years.
Yep.
You knew there was a possibility that you could be drafted because the draft was...
I knew I could be drafted because everybody, when you turned 18, you would be drafted.
But you chose to enlist before then. Why was that?
I had a soft spot, I guess, for the Navy. So before graduation, I did enlist, and I got deferred for 3 days until after graduation.
What'd you do during those 3 days?
Partied.
Partied?
No, actually, I partied for 2 days, and the third day before I went down, I spent with my mother. And then on Monday morning, she took me down to the City Hall in LA, where I took my physical.
What was the definition of party back in those days?
Well, a lot of your buddies would get together, and one of our hangouts at that time was Laguna Beach, which is in Southern California. Is one of the places the young kids used to go and hang out. And our big thing was going dances. At that time, you had the Benny Goodman, you had Tommy Dorsey. These were all the big bands at that time. And the jitterbug, of course, was the dance. So we did a lot of that during that period of time.
Good, clean fun then back then.
Oh, yeah.
Having known what was happening at Pearl Harbor and, seeing our American fleet get attacked, what made you decide to enlist?
There was no question. I mean, you knew that you were going to go no matter what. And having lived in California, and the war was very prominent in California because of the war in the Pacific Ocean. And where I lived as the last 2 years of high school, the area was loaded with GIs that were home on furlough. So, I mean, I was very well aware of what. Then you had your, a lot of your aircraft were being built. Lockheed was not too far from where we lived. They built planes. So the war effort was going on and on all around us.
So it was kind of part of the environment was where you were living was...
Very much so.
Yeah, okay. How did your mom feel about your decision? I mean, obviously the draft was going on and she knew it was a possibility as well as you did, but how did she feel about you stepping up?
I think she was glad that I went to the Navy because at least I knew I had a place to sleep and food to eat, I mean, where if I had been in the service, I might have been in some foxhole somewhere around the world, but at least I had a place. I think that made it a little bit easier for her. And you got to remember, it's not easy for any mother to see her only son go.
Right. Well, and we also have to remember that back in those days, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have all the conveniences that we have today. So how did you stay in touch with your mother once you were...
It's a very good question because things were so different during World War II than they are today. Everything was top secret. You didn't dare tell where you were going because that would telegraph to the enemy. So the only thing we had mail, and I would write a letter, and we would meet maybe a supply ship once or twice a month, and they'd transfer our mail. So I would get mail and I would send mail, and that's the only other way Mother knew where I was doing or what I was doing. In those days, they had what they called newsreels in the movie theaters, and she would see once in a while where maybe our ship was at a certain area. So she knew, well, my son's on that ship, you know.
It's interesting that you say that, because I remember I'm kind of a big fan of classic movies, and I like to watch still black and white movies and things like that. But I know I've seen during some of them they had advertisements for the buy of the war bonds and things like that to kind of support the country.
Hollywood Boulevard was my playground, and I don't know if it interested you or not, but when I was in school, we would have an old Model T truck that we fixed up, and we would take it, we'd drive down Hollywood Boulevard, and we would stall it right in the middle of an intersection, purposely. And then we'd get out, a bunch of teenage kids, you know, and push it across the intersection. And I think, you know, that was the mischief in those days, and I think compared to today, it was pretty mild.
So it was just fun to get out and push it across?
Yeah. That was our outing. You know, you got to remember also there was gas rationing at that time, so you had different A, B, and C different deals for buying gas. You had to be very careful how much you drove.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, did you have any friends that enlisted with you, or did you kind of go into it on your own?
No, I enlisted on my own. I did when I turned 18. 3 days before 18, I went down and enlisted.
Of course, when you got into the service, I know that you said it was down to 50 men according to alphabetical order of your last name, and you became close friends actually with at least 2 of the people that you were.
Yeah, after boot camp, we were shipped to on a troop ship to Pearl Harbor, and we would muster out on the parade field every day for our assignment. And there was 2 fellows. One guy was from New Jersey, and the other guy was from Long Island. Harold Wicks was from New Ulm, and Ed Worrell was from New Jersey. So we kind of struck up a friendship then, and of course it lasted, we ended up being together throughout the whole time of our service.
Oh wow, and you spent all of your time with those guys.
Yeah, we were in the same division, we did the same thing aboard ship. It was just so how strange it would end up, because the 50 of us you mentioned that were at Pearl, before that, every day they would muster us out, and they would start with the alphabet. They would call people to go to amphibs. Amphibs were watercraft that would take the GIs and the Marines ashore, and they would go through the alphabet until there was only about 50 of us left. And so it was very interesting that out of the 50 of us that were left, the West Virginia came into port after being rebuilt, and we were all 50 were put aboard the West Virginia. And it so happened the 3 of us got appointed to the N Division, which is the navigation on board ship.
And your title was Seaman First Class?
Seaman First Class, Ronald Vogel. I was always Ronnie at that time.
Okay. Well, Ronnie, where were you stationed exactly on the ship?
My tour, when I was on watch, my whole tour of duty was on the bridge, and that's where the captain is. So I was able to see all of our engagements. I got, you might say, a grandstand seat to see everything. Not that I was sitting. I mean, we had a job to do, but I was able to see a lot of different things that a lot of the seamen aboard ship did not get to see.
Let me ask you, I mean, it would be nice to have that bird's eye point of view, but was it also scary up there when you would encounter big waves and high seas and things like that? Did that part of the ship rock more than the other?
Good question. I don't remember ever being scared. I do know that when we were in the China Sea and you hit those big waves, when you're up about 18 stories above the water line, and you hit the waves and the ship starts to wave back and forth, you know, you're traveling across the sky because you're at the high point of the ship, you know, you're traveling back and forth. So it was a little bit interesting, but, and there was times in the storms were so strong that when you're at the helm, or the helm is steering the ship, Can you imagine an 18-year-old kid steering a ship with 2,000 guys aboard, and you're sitting there steering it? But anyway, we carried a lot of rudder. In other words, we would carry anywhere from 10 to 15, 16 degrees of rudder just to keep the ship on course.
Wearing some big pants up in that.
Big waves.
So after being in the service and kind of getting, I don't know if you'd ever get used to it, because in earlier conversations you'd mentioned that you didn't know what the next day was going to bring. But did your time in the service, did it ever get to a point where your decision to enlist solidified and then that you knew that was the right thing to do? Or was it just a matter of being patriotic and serving your country?
You have to remember, it's the only time in our history up to that point that we're actually at war. And all the guys were involved. I mean, it was just something you did. You never thought about why or how come, but it was our duty to do what we had to do. And whether it was right or wrong, it was the thing to do.
That's interesting that you say that, because I've interviewed one other World War II veteran, and he said that it was just expected that you went to the service after you turned 18.
Yeah, because the war had already been going on for over 2 years, when I went in.
How did it feel to be an American at that time aboard the USS West Virginia, or the WWII as you called it?
At first it didn't sink into me too much until we actually were in battle with the enemy. Then all of a sudden it strikes home that
Became real.
it becomes very realistic.
Were you ever, I mean, of course we all get scared in those moments, but did the camaraderie aboard your ship kind of help ease that, and knowing that you were all in this together, that you were all fighting for the same purpose?
It's a good question, because I don't know that I ever really thought of it that way. It was a job that we had to do, and we were a crew that worked together. It's amazing when you think about it. It was not only a crew aboard, but we were a crew aboard a certain ship, because within our fleet, which is called the 7th Fleet, there were other battleships as well as ours in the old fleet. And there was always the proud feeling that you were a member of a certain ship, and that we were together. I'm from the WWII, or whether I'm from the California or I'm from the Tennessee, I mean, there was a camaraderie, sticking together for your ship.
It reminds me of the Rosie the Riveteer picture, where she's got her arm and we can do it, the effort of, even the women were, working back here in the States to help to build things for the war.
True, how true. I mean, not only California, but the United States as a whole. I don't think it's ever been, since that period of time, that the unity of the complete country coming together for one cause.
And and that, bringing up Rosie the Riveter, reminds me of I told you earlier that I used a metal detector, and I found a 1943 penny once that looked kind of an odd color, and I did a little research on it later on and found out that it was a steel penny. And it made perfect sense that they were saving the copper for the war efforts and using the different kind of metal. And I think that might have been the only year that they did that. But I thought, wow, this is a relic of history, at that time.
I remember that.
So you brought up the two friends that you came close with on the WWII, and what did you guys do for fun in your downtime?
Played cards. Probably the most thing to do is play cards. We probably had a double-deck pinochle going 24 hours a day. You go on and watch somebody else would take your hand and go over. We used to play a penny a point, 2 bits a set. Cards were the biggest thing. Otherwise, I can't, living aboard ship, when you think of it, there's about 2,000 aboard ship. We had a regular kitchen, we had a regular hospital, we had a barber shop, we had a general store that you could, cigarettes, 5 cents a pack.
Really?
And they served ice cream and stuff like that, the storekeepers. So, I mean, we were a city on the waters, really, because we had everything there. So, And one of the exciting things that happened, talk about camaraderie, is there's a deal with the Navy when you cross the equator. It's called going from a polywog to a shellback. And it so happened that most of the crew, as we left Pearl Harbor, a good share of them hardly hadn't been at the sea very much, or a very long period of time. And there were a few of the old salts that had been around quite a while, so they were the shellbacks, and the rest of us were polywogs. So we had to go through this hazing as we crossed the equator. And you got King Neptune, he's in charge, and there's the grease being smeared, and saltwater bath and all that. It was just a lot of fun, but that was one of the diversions that we had at one time crossing the equator.
Do you think that same attitude of patriotism that you felt while you served still exists in America today, Ron?
No. The country's so divided. I mean, the old story, one for all and all for one, it's not there anymore. I think the new generation, not only with the kids, but the older generation, there's not the camaraderie that there used to be, you know. You've always had the do-gooders and stuff like that, but the achievers, but I don't know, there's not the unity that there used to be, I don't think.
Do you think it's a result of the people that we've elected to be in office not being able to come together and compromise, and what the media has thrown at us over the years? And I think it's almost a lack of education and fact-checking and checking 3 different sources of information just to see if the information being put out there is consistent across the line.
You know, you mentioned that. I wonder how the news media, all the major networks, how much are they slanted one way or another? Are they giving a true look at the general public, or are they kind of cherry picking? You know,
yeah,
what they want us to hear. That's where I'm at right now, and you've got CNN, you got Fox, you got ABC, and you got CBS, and it seems like there's so much controversy between the major networks as to how true or how factual some of the stuff that we're hearing.
In your opinion, Ron, how divided of a country are we today as opposed to in 1944 when you served World War II?
Very divided. I think when the Japanese dropped the bomb on Pearl, I thought for a while when they put the bomb, the deal at 9/11 would bring things together, but it did for a little bit, but we're still back that same thing.
A lot of our soldiers are coming back with PTSD. Now, of course, PTSD wasn't called PTSD back in those days, and I'm curious if there even was, from World War II, did you ever experience or know anybody that had those same conditions that our soldiers today are experiencing?
No, none whatsoever. I think you have to also go back to that period of time. We were fighting a war. We have not been at war since. We've been going out to be peacekeepers for other countries and living in all different kinds of conditions. And these poor guys that are going out there now, the people that are living here don't care less, you know, what these guys are doing. They're doing a job because they're told to do it, not because they, you know, we're fighting for anything better here in this country. We're trying to be peace people for other countries, and it's gotten out of hand.
Do you think that if we erase all of our history, we're going to make the same mistakes again?
No doubt. There's always going to be somebody that's going to have a better way. There's a bunch of people who think that they're mightier than thou, and we forget how this country was founded. You know, it was founded on Christianity, and people forget that. You know, I think that's a big part of it. There's so many different nationalities and things like now, and they're trying to dominate, you know, our society, and forgetting how we actually started this country.
I feel like in my time of living that we're kind of seeing a downhill slope in the way that our country is going. Would you agree with that?
Oh boy, 100%. And it starts with Congress. I mean, until the Congress decides to to work for the country as a whole instead of their own private enterprise, you know, we'd be a lot better off. But I just hope that the new generation can see this and get things turned around. You know, you talk about that. Let's go back to our fathers of the country. We think of George, you know, and all these people back then when they put this country together and their vision, what was going to happen. And it been going so smoothly, even up through World War II. And it's only been in the last probably decade that things are starting to unravel, I feel, you know. People get around, technology is taken over. People travel all over the world now. There's no limit to where you can go and what you can do. We were a country by ourselves, but now it's a worldwide, you know, country, and it has an effect, I think, on how things are going to be or how they're going to go. Like I say, I feel sorry for the next generation.
One thing we learned in college was how people today that grew up with cell phones in their hands, or even, you know, the kids that are being taught with iPads and, you know, technology at school, it's great.
You see this all the time.
But they lose the ability to sit down and have a conversation like you and I are having.
What you're saying, I can give you an example. Not too long ago, I saw two young people sitting side by side, and they were texting one another. Sitting side by side. They could not talk to one another. They had to text one another. Where are we going? I don't know. They won't even need the modern language.
No, we're all becoming zombies dependent. What happens if our power grid goes out? We're going to freak out. 100 years ago, people hunted for their food and stuff like that. We wouldn't have access to the supermarket or be able to order a pizza online. I mean...
But I'll ask you a question. Would you trade back?
I mean, I've been called an old soul several times, and of course, I would say yes at first, but not knowing the hardships of having to hunt and gather for your food, and, you know, cut down the firewood so you can stay warm. It's nice to have the conveniences, but at the same time,
I think what's happened, we've misused the conveniences. I mean, it's nice to have all these new fang-dangle things, you know, make life easier for everybody. And a good part of this, is, I think, is medical. What they have done in the medical industry is just amazing when you think people are living longer now and are healthy more than they ever have been before. So I don't think I want to go back to where we were, but I just hope that their values would kind of keep up with technology.
yeah, and maintain that human element.
Yeah.
Well, Ron, thank you, sir, for your service, and thank you for sitting down to do this interview with me. I'm sorry about we had some technical troubles.
Well, thanks for having me.